pulpit today. Mary is a member of our vestry. She's been a member of St. John's for quite a while, and she is also the executive director of Genesis, an organization that we rely on heavily for our involvement in policy and efforts in the broader community. So welcome, Mary. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. So as Scott said, I am Mary Lynn Lampy. We became members of St. John's about 8 years ago. I brought my then 9-year-old to, we didn't know it was gonna be a quesadilla Sunday, and there happened to be a bounce house, and she turned to me and said, "Mom, this is our church." And we've still been here even though there's not a bounce house every single week and not quesadillas every single week. I am the executive director of Genesis, as Scott said. We are a faith and community-based coalition. We have member congregations and organizations, and you might know that St. John's is a founding congregation of Genesis, and Scott is a founding pastor of our organization. We join our members together to work towards policies and laws that reflect our values, like compassion and redemption, kindness, and equity. One of the key issues this year was to push to stop the practice of prone restraints, chokeholds, and chemical sprays in Juvenile Hall in Alameda County. In order to work on issues like this, we engage youth and voters to make our voices heard to elected officials. So I just want to thank all the youth that are here, everyone who's under the age of 18. You're so important to this community and just keeping us going. So thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to flex my preaching skills as a community organizer this morning. While prepping for this sermon, I was reflecting on 3 things. 1 was the gospel, 2 was light bulbs, and 3 was love. So on the gospel, I was centered on the last words and thoughts of Jesus. I was thinking that this was one of my favorite parts of the story of Jesus, but he does die. So it's like one of the most powerful parts for me of the story of Jesus. His last thoughts were praying for people, for them. Who do you think them was? His enemies, who were about to murder him. People who were making fun of him. Those were who were just standing by and watching. He was thinking about forgiveness, and he found a way to say, "I love you," even when you're making this mistake. He didn't need to do that. What that passage spoke to me was that Jesus was really radical in his love. He used some of his last words to pray for forgiveness. What an act of radical love. On the light bulbs. Many of you know that this year I recently lost my dad, Dr. Larry Lim. He's on the prayer list. I spent a couple of weeks with my mom in the Midwest, which is where I'm from. She's alone now for the first time in 54 years. I know that there are those of you in this room who know this feeling. One of the issues we had was that every lamp in the living room had no light bulb. So I was going through a cabinet and I found 4 light bulbs. Each one had a receipt taped to each one and a label saying exactly what lamp each light bulb belonged in my dad's handwriting. So I imagine my dad shopping for light bulbs and getting white labels with a Sharpie and writing where each one belonged. And love. I was reflecting about how my ministry of community organizing, pushing for justice, is all about love. Love of the people affected by the issues, usually people of color, usually young people, people with disabilities, elders, immigrants, people who I fiercely love. Loving these people is a no-brainer. I was raised by immigrant people of color. I'm raising a young woman of color. I also love the people who sit in the pews of Genesis churches. Most often, these are people who benefit from things staying the way they are. Rare to often, these are people who show courage and vision because they believe that some benefiting over the oppression of others is against God. These people, many times Genesis leaders, are a small percentage of people who do something. The hard part of my job is the reality is that the majority of the people in our community do nothing. I love them too. These are people who perhaps are overwhelmed. I know they are products of an oversaturated information cycle. I know they are witness to young humans being shot in a club in Colorado, in schools. I know they are products of capitalism, of patriarchy. And I also know that my job as a community organizer is to call people out of their slumber. It has been my experience, and thank God, that once people stop doing nothing, they become vibrant and motivated. So we have Jesus' example of generous love. I love you even when I have pain and death on my mind. And we have my dad's example of love. He taped receipts of where he got the light bulbs on every single one of them and labeled them. Who does that? Because he didn't want my mom worrying about this one last thing. And we have my love in community organizing. I'm a first-generation Chinese American, and I was thinking about the Chinese character for love. It has two parts. One is the feeling we have for one another in our hearts, and the other is action. In all three examples, Jesus, my dad and the light bulbs, and in community organizing, we see love, that feeling, and action. My question for you is, what action are you going to take to show your love? Last night, my organization, Genesis, worked to raise money and fully fund our youth internship program. We engage youth as young as 13 years old to link arms and lean in by animating their values, the values that we teach them. We had a goal of $10,000. We've raised over half of that, with money still coming in. If you want to hear about how to support us, talk to your reps, Kirby Marion, Ian Storr, who's a Genesis treasurer. I know that writing a check can be satisfying, but often not. Another action I'd like to invite you to is that this church, St. John's, has an action and justice team. Notice that we don't call it the Let's Think About Justice team or the Let's Talk About Justice team. We're very specific about putting the word action and justice together. They will be meeting on Wednesday, November 30th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. This team, you may know, gathered a faith forum in 2022 to engage voters on a historic district attorney race in Alameda County. For the first time in 17 years, we have a different district attorney. We invite you to join the Action and Justice team of St. John's as they plan their actions for 2023. Ann Meyer is leading this, and it's on Zoom, so if you'd like info, you can see Ann and see any of us after the service. One last story. Most of you know, many of you know, you follow me on Instagram. I'm a rower. I row on a team. And one of the jobs of rowing is that we have what's called the coxswain, who is in charge of navigating all the rowers. The rowers row backwards, and the coxswain is the only one that sees the vision of where we are going. The very first time I did this, we almost hit a bridge. Just almost. The coach stopped us because every single moment is a lesson. And she stopped me and said, "Mary, we almost hit the bridge. What did you do to correct the course?" And I said, "Nothing." And she said, "Okay, next time, don't do nothing. Do something. Try something, try this, try that, and then correct it if it's the wrong thing, but don't do nothing." What action will you do to show your love? Doing nothing. Don't do nothing. I want to give a shout out to our co-chair, who's a guest here today, Katie Grinberg. And I also want to give a shout out to all of you, especially the people who love people like me who've gone through grief. I love how much I got cards, my mom got cards, all kinds of words and hugs and love as we go through this transition. I have learned so much about grief not being a single point in time. So thank you. And it is my invitation. Like, what can you do to not do nothing?